My job is to mostly stay out of the way of these smart authors, but I've got to tell you some things before I get out of their way. So bear with me while I tell you some things. The main thing to know is from Susie's remarks, like I'm an author sitting up next to authors. South Arts, by way of this new literary prize, puts $80,000 of cold, hard cash via direct grants to writers starting this year and going forward. Like, that matters. No strings come with it. No strings come with that $80,000. No follow-up paperwork. No pony shows. Nobody's got to sing and dance for their money. Like, this is important. Each of the writers on this panel today are beneficiaries of that work on behalf of South Arts. So together, South Arts and Hub City Press, which is my favorite American indie press, published this beautiful thing. What We Are Becoming is the title of the new publication to which these smart people contributed. It's a catalog of wonders, a survey of the promise that literature written from the South offers. Characters in these brief fictions eat breakfast of ackee and saltfish and feast on dinners of boiled crawfish. They film wildlife documentaries and blow glass. Scenes take place in a tiny Bronx, New York apartment because the South that we are describing in this book, the South that we live in now, is a porous and global place. They also take place in an empty house in rural Dogwood, Tennessee. Beautiful things happen when an artist with dementia leans into her last project. Creepy things happen in an attic stuffed with bassinets and, forgive me, a gully strewn with dildos. True story. I mean, maybe not a true story, a fictional story in this book. So today we have the great pleasure of hearing from each of these 9 writers. I'm going to offer a short introduction, a compressed version of all the great things they've done, so you know who is speaking, where they're from, and then they're going to tell you, if they need to, a little bit of setup about this piece. Think of it as an exercise in flash fiction. They're going to take you somewhere really quick, and then they're going to drop you back off, and you're going to pick up somewhere else. So just ride the wave. So first up is from the great state of Alabama, Randy Pink, a native of Birmingham. Randy is an author, educator, and jazz vocalist. Her novels include Angel of Greenwood and Girls Like Us. Randy's upcoming novel, Under the Heron's Light, set in the historic Great Dismal Swamps, is set to be published, the last time I checked, October, is that right?
October 15th, yes.
October 15th. All right. Take us somewhere, Randy.
All right. Hi. I am Randy Pink, born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And I am going to do a little story about Under the Heron's Light. Out October 15th. Authors live and die on pre-orders, so take out your phones and do that. One day, Abel was rowing his driftwood boat on the black water of the Great Dismal Swamp of North Carolina. And he saw an innocent baby, not yet 1 year old, laying helpless by the still water. Knowing well his swamp and the inhabitants of it, his trained eyes caught sight of a ripple in the water, then another, and another, and another, until golden green eyes pierced the surface. Swing low, oh crocodile, baby, ain't enough for you still. The crocodile's feminine gaze fixed on that baby. Its delicious milk-fed coo echoed the waterlogged cypress and pine, a delicious morsel, easy, quick. No frills meal would be welcome to any creature in the trickster water of the Great Dismal Swamp. Abel propelled his boat toward that baby, but old Crocodile was within striking distance. Look high, old Crocodile. Croc's eyes slit into slices, focused, pained with hunger pains. Abel, the Croc said, gone on about your business. I got babies to feed of my own. She dipped deep into the water, ready to pounce. Abel held his long arm into the air. My arm up to the shoulder. Come on here and have this instead. My arm, something to behold. Grown man's arm'll get your belly fed. The crocs released the slits in her eyes, accepting Abel's offer, biting off his freely given arm and spitting out his cufflinks until they ricocheted on the surface of the black water. Abel raised that baby to become king. Thank you.
I wish y'all could see yourselves, like gape-mouthed listening. Speaking of mouths, we have a treat for our panelists. Hunter Evans, who has a new old restaurant here, the Mayflower in downtown Jackson, baked some pie for y'all. So I figure if you got prizes, you should get pie. So our friend and colleague, Nina Parikh from South Arts, is going to bring pie to you. Everybody else is getting to eat lunch right now. You're having pie lunch. And when after Nina makes her deposits, we'll hear from Camille Boxell. There's a little bit of, I think there's some coconut and some lemon, but you don't get to choose unless Nina lets you.
Thank you. We have choices. Oh my gosh.
Are there sweeter words in the English language than lemon or coconut?
Yes.
This is actually quite cruel. I didn't realize how cruel this would be. 'Cause y'all are here eating and they're not.
Thank you.
So one thing to know as you listen to Randy read, each one of these excerpts you hear are going to be about 2 minutes, and that's purposeful. We pick you up in one place, we drop you down in another. Thank you, Nina.
Where was my pie?
There actually is some more back in the kitchen. All right, Camille Boxell, a Jamaican-American writer based in South Florida. Camille has enjoyed support and recognition from the Iowa Writers Workshop Summer Program and the Hurston Wright Foundation. Her debut novel will explore the themes of multi-generational trauma, legacy, and identity, alongside elements of Jamaican folklore. There you are.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to be reading a brief excerpt from the prologue of my current work in progress. Mama says anything done in the dark must come to light, but I know how to keep a secret. After a long day of stifling heat, bottomless cups of rum cream, and barely audible melodies humming from ancient wood-paneled speakers, my family gathers in the kitchen, exchanging embarrassing tales from their childhood that seem to grow more exaggerated with each retelling. I watch from the front room for a moment before slipping onto the veranda, carefully closing the iron gate behind me. Outside it's dusk. I imagine the sun and horizon kissing in the distance, the waning moon looking on from above. It will be dark by the time I arrive. It's better that way. Darkness cloaks the parish, snuffing out the once fire-golden skies. I try to quell a pang of guilt as I think about Mama, wondering what she would say if she knew my plans. Would she blame herself? Disown me? Growing up, I heard all sorts of stories. In Mandeville, a young woman walks home from work and feels she is being followed. She looks over her shoulder. No one is there. When she looks ahead again, she sees her dead father standing in front of her. Just as quickly as he appears, he is gone. The following morning, the young woman's mother says that her late husband appeared in her dreams, telling her to warn their daughter of walking alone at night.
From Georgia, Constance Collier Mercado is an experimental writer and artist committed to Black language and collective memory. Born in Chicago, raised in the Bronx, now living in Atlanta. Remember that idea of the South is not this tightly controlled place, but the South is everywhere. Family ties connect her to Mississippi and the Carolinas, speaking of the same. She has received support from the Jack Jones Literary Arts and has published work in Rootwork Journal and The Believer.
Hi, everyone. So this is going to be an exercise in super flash fiction. It's a very, very short excerpt. And I'll give a little explanation of it on the back end. I exist as a series of moods: fog, sunlight, ocean waves spilling over shoreline, good luck charm dangling from atlas, axis, cervix +5, rabbit's foot resting between saggy breasts, water in womb, two-strand twist amniotic fluid, bleach-faded memory, and rainbow. That last one's my favorite. I like to think of myself as a nimbus of light floating high above. They say it's not real. Another hallucination. What does it mean that I only feel real when I'm not? That I only exist in the world as someone else's bad day, or good day, or waking dream? What does it mean to live as a qualifier to wholeness? And so that's kind of a stream of conscious opening to a chapter from my character who is dealing with schizophrenia, and she's hearing voices that she believes are calling her to a hero's journey, which is kind of the crux of the story. Can she be a hero and be dealing with this illness? And thank you.
Thank you. All right, up next, Ashley Blooms is the author of Where I Can't Follow, which was a finalist for the Weatherford Award. Their debut novel, Every Bone a Prayer, was longlisted for the Crooks Corner Book Prize. Now living in Lexington, Kentucky, Ashley received their MFA as a John and Renee Grisham Fellow from the University of Mississippi.
Hey y'all, this is an excerpt from my current novel in progress, What the Wolf Wants. Esther had never truly known a home. She barely remembered the house she had lived in for the first 7 years of her life, though she dreamed of it sometimes. Always of the willow tree by the kitchen, whose roots had broken through their floors and taken over their garden, fighting them at every turn to reclaim the land. Just before they left, Esther's mother took an axe to the tree in the middle of the night, leaving it mangled but still standing. It was the last thing Esther ever saw of home. She carried the image of the tree's contorted limbs with her wherever she went, the split bark peeled back to reveal the tender flesh inside, paler because the light had never touched it. She had been 7 when they left that home, and it seemed to unlock something in her parents. They could never get enough leaving after that. The rest of her childhood was a blur of front doors and cracked foundations, leaking roofs and creaking floors, messy goodbyes and half-buttoned coats, and always, always hurried escapes. A decade had passed since the first move, but Esther found that each move still felt the same. They had only been in the house she stood in for 8 months, but the leaving had found them again, hurried onward by the angry men outside their front door. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Louisiana with Maurice Carlos Ruffin, a native of New Orleans. His first book, We Cast a Shadow, was a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award and was longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award. His second, The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You, was a 2023 One Book, One New Orleans selection. His third, The American Daughters, was a New York Times Editor's Choice. Please, sir.
Hey, everybody. Such a pleasure to be up here with so many wonderful writers, and congrats to the winners of the prize. All right, so I never read this out loud, so I'm just going to see what happens. I'll read very briefly. People that know me, it's a New Orleans thing. We have music in New Orleans, so a little music. Okay, so here's the setup. It's 1866, and you are a woman who has been attacked by this total jerk who dressed up like a priest in the French Quarter. And he would have got away with it too, except she yelled so loud she was rescued. And so in this scene, she's in the courthouse, but she realizes that because of racism, the people on the jury, these guys, are not going to convict the person who assaulted her. So she has her own plan for getting back at this dude. All right, briefly. Davidson raises his arm. Thank you, Miss Pittman. That will do enough. We don't wish to give the jury night terrors. I huffed. What about my terrors? I say, but he don't hear. I expect no kind of justice here. I'm just another darky, hardly worth throwing away the life of one of their own, guilty or not. So We really only hear on account of how loud Buford screamed when I cut his face. Like a babe with colic, they saw my clothes shredded like I'd been clawed by a lion, and they saw Buford, too big around the shoulders and too rough around the hands to be a priest. The police grabbed Buford on the spot. It was in the papers too. That's why we're here, because of the attention. That man over there, by the table? I asked. Yes, Miss Davison, the attorney of the city of New Orleans, says. Have you seen that man before? That man over there, who's as ugly as sin. Some of my folk up in the gallery start laughing. But the men in the jury box, they beat-faced. Miss Pittman, I must insist. I squint. I never seen that man in all my born years. I swear it. And people around the room gasp. The judge bangs his gavel. Buford's lawyer with the round glasses stands up. Your Honor, I move for an immediate dismissal of the present matter. And later, it's dark out. The bells of St. Louis Cathedral over Jackson Square ring out. And this is how I know it's around midnight when Buford shows his face at the exit of District Jail. A policeman shoves him out. Buford dusts off his coat and starts towards the cathedral, but he ain't gonna make it. I doubt he was gonna pray to the Lord anyway. Don't matter none. My basket is full of baguettes and oranges for my young ones, and I have a knife, a long one too. I use it for gutting sow at the butchery, and when I pull it out, it shakes like it's singing. Don't matter if Buford was gonna pray, I'm his Lord tonight.
What book did that come from, Maurice?
The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You, it's 19 short stories featuring Black characters in the city of New Orleans over a 300-year period. Oh, we got so many Pittmans in Louisiana, for real. Yeah.
All right. So, alongside Maurice is Melissa Ginsburg in the state that is alongside his state, Mississippi. And she is the author of the novels The House Uptown, set in New Orleans, and Sunset City, the poetry collections Doll Apollo and Dear Weather Ghost, and 3 poetry chapbooks. Some of her poems have appeared in The New Yorker. Originally from Houston, Texas, Melissa serves the University of Mississippi as Associate Professor of Creative Writing and Literature.
Thank y'all. I'm going to read an excerpt from The House Uptown, which is my most recent novel. This is another New Orleans book. So this character, Lane, is in her 60s, early 70s when the book takes place, and she has beginning stages of dementia. So the book moves in and out of time pretty fluidly as Lane is experiencing it. Lately, thoughts of Thomas tumbled into the present, unbidden. They felt like visitations of some sort, a transporting of the past into the present. A memory took over, a complete sensory immersion, paralyzing. The smell of yeast, the ringing phone, flower motes dancing through a shaft of kitchen sunlight. The cramp in her neck as she held the receiver with her shoulder to keep her hands in the dough. Flower handprint on the receiver, flower on her dress and in her hair. Lane listened to the voice on the line. "Ma'am, you need to come down here." She hung up, watched the long cord curling around itself, thinking only, the bread will be ruined and Thomas will complain. She covered the dough and put it in the icebox to stall the second rise, gathered up the baby, and drove to the hospital. Lane experienced a sense of relief, immediate and astounding, when she learned the accident had killed him. She loved him. She wasn't a monster. But that first wave of clarity, that sense that she would be fine, that a lot of things would be easier now, she'd been right about that. She moved through her days quietly, caring for the baby, all the while listening to the rising sounds inside her, a buzzing voice that grew more insistent. Her life was starting. It was all hers. She would never have to give it up again.
All right, our magical mystery tour continues with Joanna Pearson from North Carolina. Her debut novel, Bright and Tender Dark, was published this June. She also is the author of 2 short story collections, Now You Know It All and Every Human Love, a finalist for the Janet Heidinger Kafka Prize for Fiction. Joanna lives near Chapel Hill, where she also works as a psychiatrist. I heard that from the front row.
That's the calming you will feel. No. I'm going to read from a story called Amo Amas Amat, which is from my story collection, Now You Know It All. It also happens to be the story that's included in our beautiful anthology. And unless there are 2 stories that feature a gully full of dildos, I believe...
Why, yes.
I believe that was the story that John was referring to earlier. So we won't get there in this little beginning part. Not long after they moved into the Green Craftsman on the east side of town near us, we began to hear things about the Melandriffers. Mr. Melandriffer was the new Latin teacher at the intermediate school. His wife was from another country, somewhere stark and recently war-ravaged. Everyone had seen Mrs. Melandriffer wandering the grocery store with a dazed expression on her face, pulling brightly colored cereal boxes down to better behold them, only to return them to the shelves again, blinking as if the whole experience was just too much for her. My mother thought Mrs. Melandriffer was beautiful, and I suppose she did have the sort of thin, extraterrestrial quality one might associate with fashion models. I'd heard Mrs. Melandriffer spoke no English, but when I mentioned this to my mother, she called me rude and asked me how many other languages I spoke. None, I said, which was why I'd signed up for Mr. Melandriffer's Latin class. Ah, Latin is wonderful, little rabbit, my mother said, kissing me on the forehead. You're becoming an intellectual. It was never entirely clear when my mother was mocking me. She had grown up in Tennessee near a small liberal arts college where her father taught, and from which she'd absorbed many vague notions about the value of intellectualism. It was my mother, of course, who'd gotten me the scholarship that allowed me to attend the private school where Mr. Melandriffer taught. We'll stop there.
Thank you. It's good you said you'd stop there because we wanted to keep going with you. From South Carolina, Frances F.E. Cho is a Korean-American writer whose work has been published in Clark's World magazine, The Moth magazine, and Fractured Lit. She is a graduate of the Clarion West Writers Workshop and an editor at 100 Word Story. Born in Toronto, Canada, she lives in Columbia, South Carolina. Thank you.
Hello. So this is an excerpt from my piece, The Singing Membrane, in which a woman has attempted to isolate herself in a cottage only to be visited by grief in the form of various birds. One morning, 2 cranes greet the glassblower in the kitchen. On the floor between them is the gold wrapper from the last of her butter, the foil picked clean. She makes no remark about the disappeared butter, the fridge door left ajar, the mess of droppings they have left on her cottage floor. She only reaches into a cabinet for the last bag of rice, scatters a handful on the ground, watches them bow their red crowns, and eat. The glassblower says nothing. Her mother taught her nothing, to be nothing if not hospitable to guests. The birds multiply rapidly after that. They steal into windows and pull apart her mattress for their nests. The glassblower finds eggs in the eaves of the cottage, nestled in with her underwear and t-shirts in the dresser drawers. She layers pile after pile of wood shavings across the floorboards of the cottage, surrenders her bedroom and pads the sagging couch with an old quilt, picks feathers from her sleeves and hair each morning when she wakes. At night, the rafters creak and moan under the weight of their bodies. The glassblower is terrified the roof will cave in. She tries not to think of this too much.
Thank you. And our last speaker, Yurina Yoshikawa from the great state of Tennessee, has published in The Atlantic and on National Public Radio. She has been awarded the Tennessee True Stories Prize. Before claiming Nashville, she lived in Tokyo and New York. She hosts the Japanese Literature Book Club for the Japan America Society of Tennessee and serves as Director of Education at the Porch Writers Collective.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Yurina Yoshikawa from Tennessee, and the setup of this excerpt, which is in the anthology, is we're following a man named Tom, who's a Japanese-American man. He's recently grieving the loss of his wife, and he and his son moved from their little apartment in New York to a rural town in Dogwood, Tennessee. And this is a story about a man who's trying to overcome a lot of grief while setting up a lot of expectations about finding a fresh start in a new space and what that means when he goes there. And the scene is a part where he has a nightmare. It's a little spooky. I'm back in the same dream again. I'm in our old kitchenette in New York, waiting for the water to boil. I'm there to make chamomile tea for Naoko. After the cancer spread to her lungs, she got an oxygen nasal cannula to help her breathe, which meant she couldn't be near the gas stove due to the risk of explosion. The stove is on the highest flame setting, and I see Naoko walking slowly towards me, the oxygen tank on wheels behind her. You shouldn't be here, I say. It's dangerous. She laughs, which makes her cough. What's so funny? I ask. You, she starts, struggling with each word. Shouldn't be here either, Tom. The doorbell is ringing, a series of loud, reverberating ding-dongs that instantly wakes me up. I feel Max squirming next to me. He pulls the duvet over his head, turning himself into a little lump. I get my glasses and check my phone to find more unread messages and the clock saying 9:54 a.m. It's been a while since we slept in like this.
Thank you, Red. All right, so I have a couple of questions to ask, and that may be all the time we have. We have such a bounty of talent here, but I hope we're able to offer y'all out in the audience a chance to ask questions too. The first question I have, and I don't have an order to prescribe here, I would hope that somebody is excited by this question and leaps in, and then others leap in behind them. That's the hope. So it's a simple question, and so it's the idea of like, so you've been awarded this fellowship. What does it make possible for you to pursue? What does it allow you to dream? What does it engender in you now? What may happen in the future based on this moment together today? You're looking at me like you're going to talk. Oh,
Me?
You were.
Make very strong
Danger
eye
looking at
contact, and it gets me in trouble. I'm, like Maurice shared, just really incredibly honored to sit alongside some of these like really talented writers. I think it was really well timed, and when I got the announcement, so I found out within days that I got the state fellowship and that I was accepted to this year's Iowa Writers Workshop summer program, and so I was actually able to use the funds from the fellowship to be able to attend, and I spent 3 really great weeks in Iowa City. It's very small, but like a gem of a city, and has a lot of literary history. And I think, you know, it just makes me feel that this journey that I'm on as a writer is worth it. I think during the pandemic, we kind of all reevaluated what we were doing, and I decided to leave my job, break my lease, move to England to pursue writing. And I think my mom was probably horrified at the thought of that. But being recognized by South Arts, which is such a respected organization, makes me feel like I made the right decision and I'm kind of following the right path.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to this?
I'll speak.
Please, Randy.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you. It's definitely an honor to sit up here. In the anthology, I wrote a story called "Kill the Mockingbird." It is from the perspective of Calpurnia, the maid in To Kill a Mockingbird, who I believe and have always believed since I was a child deserves a voice. She's a reader, a Black reader in Macomb, teaching Jim and Jean Louise to read and write. And my plan with this, I've already written it, is to shop a screenplay and stage play from the perspective of Calvert. And yes, to prove that the Black Maiden To Kill a Mockingbird is more than her vocation.
So I'll just say that every writer is an ugly duckling. You know, and a lot of things in life, like I'm a former corporate lawyer, so I would get paid to go in an office, whether I was doing good work or bad work, I got paid for that. But for many of us, you know, people say like, you're a writer. Like, what does that even mean? You know, prove it to me. And so it can be hard to sustain yourself because time is the most important commodity we have. So, you know, South Arts is giving us time. And then you write a great book, you know, or a great play, and you put the thing out and you go, oh, you were a swan the whole time. But South Arts believe that, you know, before it even happened. And that's what's really special about this experience.
That's great. Anybody else feel?
I have something to add to that, which, yes, I feel like for a lot of us who wear a lot of hats, you know, it's kind of hard these days to just be a writer. I feel like we're all kind of having to do a lot at the same time. For me, I'm also a mother of 2 young children, and I tend to put my work and kids before I think about, you know, sitting down with my own writing. It tends to take the back seat of things. And so this fellowship has allowed me to think a little bit more about how I can invest in childcare, you know, so that I can give myself that time, just like Maurice was saying, and how important that is, even though in day-to-day life, that's always felt like a luxury. So I'm very grateful.
I love the practicality of that. Yeah, please.
I've also got a practical answer to piggyback on that. Yeah, it is. It will provide me a beautiful gift of time. I also have young kids, and the timing was such that I learned that I got an opportunity to go to McDowell for a writing residency and to VCCA for a writing residency, and this will help me both handle transportation and also some extra childcare to make that a reality. So great.
That's great. You look at me like you want to say something.
So I think my answer bleeds into one of the other questions that you may get
That's
to.
okay.
So,
Yeah.
but this whole experience has just felt like such an affirmation for me. I really appreciated, John, the way that you mentioned the thinking about the South in a global perspective, because the South impacts everything, not just is everywhere, but people don't realize how much they gain, they're gifted, they're blessed with because of Southern states and what we contribute to the global society. And as someone whose family migrated away from the South 2 generations ago for me, my homecoming always felt a bit conflicted with worry that I wasn't Southern enough. And so this is just such an affirmation in a way that I wanted to say thank you to the South. I wanted to say thank you to South Carolina, to Mississippi, to Atlanta, and to get something back about, you know, we see what you're trying to do with the work was just really huge for me.
Right. I don't want to impede anyone who has something to say on this subject. Is there anyone else? Melissa?
Yeah, I mean, back to what these folks have been saying about time, and I mean, so this grant allowed me to take time off from teaching over the summer and start a new novel and travel to Tennessee and New Orleans to do research. And so that's just been like an incredible gift. And yeah, such an honor to be up here with all of y'all.
Yep. So I want to take where you took us in your comments to think about this idea of the South as an idea. The South as a place, a geographical place, yes. The South as an idea, and how these writers grapple with that idea of the South and the reality of the South, or absence from the South, or anger about the South, or love of the South. Your relationship to both the geographic place and the idea in your past writing, in your present, moving toward the future, however you choose to answer it. I'd love to hear from each of y'all about that relationship. This is a tough place to love sometimes, but in my experience, it takes love. But so who wants to plunge, please? You want to plunge?
I'll plunge.
All right.
Yeah, I think that, part of love is being willing to sit with the difficult things as much as it is looking at the things that are beautiful or wonderful about your home. And I think that my work always tries to hold each of those things simultaneously, the things that are, that keep me coming back, that make me want to fight and stay in my home regardless of anything, that make me love Appalachian Kentucky. But there's also a lot there that needs critiqued lovingly. And so I think I'm, being from there, I'm in some of the best position to be able to look at it with care and with tenderness and understanding of like the vastly complicated history of my home and why things are the way that they are and why things need to change. And so I think my work tries to take on both of those and to also, I infuse speculative elements into my work. And so it's also about thinking always of what people think of Appalachia, which also holds within it ideas of what Appalachia cannot be, and kind of pushing back against that by saying, this is also a strange and surreal and magical and fantastical place. And so just always trying to hold both of those things together.
Yeah. It's a hard thing to do. Yeah.
Yes. So I remember when I got the first call, I was just really shocked because, I am pretty new to the South still. And as Constance so eloquently put it, I love the way that South Arts and, the work that you all do just embraces this idea of a more borderless way of thinking. And for me, the thing that I, as a writer, have been writing a lot about, because I've lived in so many places, I've always felt like an outsider. But sometimes I think it takes an outsider's perspective to see some things about a place. And the thing that I've noticed first and foremost about Tennessee is how it's so similar to Japan. And it's not quite obvious in the beginning, but for me, when I spoke to some of my neighbors who had lived there for many, many years, I was like, I feel like I'm talking to my great aunt. It was just so, the idea of hospitality, but also in Japan, we have a saying about we have a front face and an inside face. And the front face is what you are, put yourself together, you appear nice, and then you have your like real inside. And it's not meant to be a duplicitous thing. It's just kind of a way of showing respect in a culture, and the more you get to know someone, you'll get to see that inner layer. And so I've really felt this connection, as a Japanese person, like I feel like I immediately was able to communicate that southernness, even though I am still an outsider. So I like to write about that a lot and explore, but it's been interesting too, like reading the other, everyone else's work in the anthology and just how wide that spectrum is of how we're expressing ideas about a place.
Urena and I talked some about this morning at breakfast. This idea I've been working on that there are active Southerners and passive Southerners. I'm a passive Southerner. I was born in Georgia. And then there are active Southerners, people who move here and choose to contribute to this place. And that, to me, is a more powerful thing than however many dang generations you were born here, how deep your people go, how deep your roots go. I choose to live here, and you choose to contribute to this place. That's the thing. It's beautiful. So who else? Stop me sermonizing. Somebody else talk.
I'll go.
All right.
I think for me, I'm an avid gardener, and I bathe in nature a lot in the woods, and so everything for me goes back to that. So when I think of the South, I think of the thicket and the dismal swamp, and how the water in the swamp can be black. And you step there and you don't know if it's a water moccasin there, or if you don't know if it's a old crocodile is there to take your arm, and as a Black woman born and raised here, the South feels like the thicket sometimes. And I'm trying to avoid the dark spots that might be threatening to me as a human person. And meanwhile figure out a way to enjoy the beauty of it all at the same time. It's a balance. And also the aggression of the woods, where the aggression is beautiful and bless your heart, you know? It's shielded in the clutching of the purse. And I have to watch out for that too. So it's complicated in a way that nature is complicated.
That's good stuff. Who else has got good stuff?
Imagine how boring the world would be without the South. Like take our food out of the equation, take our music out of the equation, take the way we talk out of the equation. You know, America's just Canada then. You know what I'm saying? It would just be Canada. It's like you just move Canada down. It's just, you know, and the thing about it is like some people in the history of our region made some bad decisions. You know, that was our leaders, but that's not the people. You know, because like without putting too fine of a point on it, there's people out here right in this room right now who present as black but have white ancestors. There's people that present as white, they got black ancestors. We are one people. And it's this strange community that has created this wonderful culture that people look to. You know, without us, there's no gospel, rock and roll, even hip hop passed through the South, you know? So it's just wonderful, and it's material to write about. You know, you're not going to see boring Southern stories and you know, boring Southern plays and boring poetry from us because we just got so many things to say, you know?
Here you go. Who else? Come on.
I'll say something. Yeah, I mean, I think the South is like, it's messy and it's complicated. Also very beautiful, and there's like an inclusivity here and like an acceptance of oddity, I think, in the South that I haven't found in other parts of the country. Like it's like there's a little more room here for just weirdos, you know, and that's like the only people I'm interested in writing about. So I just feel like it's the worlds that I want to envision, like they couldn't exist in any other region.
I like that. Sounds like you were ready.
Oh, I mean, Kelly, everybody said so many brilliant things, but I'll just say that as someone who grew up in a little small town in Western North Carolina, all I wanted as a young kind of hungry person was, I gotta get out of the South. I gotta go to where the fancy people are in New York, and that's where they're doing the interesting things. And I think what I love now, having been back for a long time, I think is exactly what everybody's saying. I think it's a place that's rich in contradiction and rich in complexity, and that's exactly why I love it. I think it's the very friction and even the times that I feel a little disaffected by things inside. I mean, that's the place from which interesting art comes, I think.
Yeah. I don't want to disrupt anybody else who wants to speak. One more question, then questions for the audience. We're supposed to end a little after 1, is that right? At 1. Okay, at 1. All right, so we will, I promise. Okay, yeah. So the last question, I'm not gonna suggest everybody answer this, but I heard you speak to it, Ashley, and I just heard in a bunch of different ways I've heard y'all speak to this. Are you in some way inheriting a narrative that you're either attempting to elaborate or disrupt? Some narrative, and that could be inherited from popular culture, it could be from your reading, it could be from your parents, your grandparents. Is there something that you are grappling with when you think about your writing now or in the future that is the pinpoint place to start? Would you share it if that is the case?
So, 2 things come to mind. One is the question of who gets to be a hero. And so the novel I'm working on is very centered around the idea of the hero's journey, and the coming of age kind of aspect that goes into that. But my character starts as a teenager and we follow her well into adulthood. And so I'm trying to disrupt ideas of, one, that what the gender of a hero is, the age of a hero, the what constitutes a coming of age moment, all of those kinds of things is one disruption. And then I'm obsessed with the nuances of language, and this really ties into the Southern aspect. I think people outside of Southern states think that we all have the same Southern drawl. There's just one uniform Southern
Right,
drawl.
right.
And so I think in my intro you mentioned Black language and memory is kind of the way that I get into the idea of many voices coming out of my mouth, coming out of my characters' mouths, the voices that my character is hearing, making them nuanced enough, but all Southern. Different Southern voices coming out of the mouths that she's hearing, and that kind of thing is just really, really interesting to me as an inheritance. I don't think of that one as a disruption. I think of that one more as like an affirmation and an inheritance.
Anybody else wish to speak
I
to my
think,
somewhat oblique question?
yeah, I think just a quick one for me. I write historical fiction, and I tackle a lot of concepts. But one of my main goals, it pisses me off, to be honest, is downtroddenness of slavery and how how the idea somehow made its way into popular culture that slavery is a downtroddenness. And there were heroes there. Yeah. You know, like if we're telling a story of an enslaved person who decided, screw this, I'd rather live in a swamp and build my family and generations of people and create a petite marriage of thousands of Black families who never saw the outside of that swamp. Those stories are not told. People don't know about that. That is Southern heroism. And it frustrates me that the concept in popular movies, culture, is just that there was a downtroddeness. Harriet Jacobs, if you haven't heard of her, spent 7 years in an attic crawl space in Edenton, North Carolina, to escape her cruel enslaver, and then left through the Great Dismal Swamp as well to write an American classic that is still taught. These people are heroes. They keep me going. They are in me. And I think you can tell. I mean, I'm not as I ate my pie. I'm not as demure as I look. I get angry about that. And my literature tackles that. Talk about Braveheart, like shit. You know? Sorry. You know.
Thank you, Randy. Anybody else?
I'm just so impressed and honored to be among the company of, such great thinkers and writers. So I've been kind of quiet, just trying to listen as much as I can. But one common thing that I think is kind of that I'm going to piggyback off of, I think, is the idea of these common narratives that tend to flatten individuals and flatten regions, flatten areas, and just sort of, I guess, personally as a writer, part of what I think my job is in exploring on the page, trying to figure out what I think, why I think it, and also this kind of modest but also momentous goal of rendering not a flat character, but really lived in whole complicated people.
Mm-hmm. We deserve that, everybody. Anybody else? Please.
I can go. So I'm working on a story that is heavily influenced by Jamaican folklore. And so the main theme throughout is Obia, which is kind of what I call like voodoo, but in Jamaica. And it's just very taboo. And it's heavily stigmatized. I learned going there to do research that they are not going to help you because they think of it as like witchcraft, evil. And it has roots in justice making from enslaved times and like rebellions. And it was outlawed in Jamaica because the colonizers thought that it was awarding enslaved people protections. But I think the history isn't really talked about. And so I think I'm trying to kind of disrupt the negative narrative and connotation around Obia and really focus on some of the more like healing properties. the book deals with both, but I definitely want to kind of elevate some of the things that are less talked about to hopefully remove the stigma. But yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of building on what Randy was saying about anger, I definitely feel those subjects that I do want to push back against and the sort of inheritances around Appalachia. You know, depending on the political moment, Appalachia is sometimes depicted as a place where it's like that's where the true Americans live, and there's an antiquated way of life that has persevered across time, or it is a place where people are just lazy and are asking for the things that are happening to them. It just depends on the moment, and none of those narratives contain any complexity or nuance. And I think I'm motivated in some ways by spite and those times to just be like, that doesn't get to be the story that gets told. You know, as long as I am writing, as long as I am here to tell a story, that doesn't get to be the only narrative that exists about Appalachia. And I want to try to bring more of it to life in the way that I've experienced it, in the way that I see it, to offer kind of a counterweight to some of the things that are the easy predominant narratives that you can see, to offer something that is more complex and more honest from my lived experience.
One quick thing for me is, and we were talking about this too at breakfast, but I think there's been a lot of people moving to the South from other cities in recent years, and I'm one of them too, from 2017. But I've seen a lot of people after the pandemic kind of reevaluate place. And so they come to places like Nashville to start a new life. And the thing that I've been thinking about a lot is the word transplant, which is how a lot of people describe the people who are moving into these cities. And I just hate that term because it implies that you are taking over something that was already there, or that you're replacing, or that you're better and newer. And I do think there is that mentality sometimes of, now Nashville has a Shake Shack like New York, therefore it's better. Like, not really, And so I think in my writing, I really want to disrupt that notion of, just because you're coming from a bigger city doesn't make you better, and that there's an importance of that cross-cultural dialogue and learning, but that can often come through a lot of tensions and, messiness, like someone else put it, so.
The messiness is beautiful. All right, so we have time for one, maybe two questions. And we already have a volunteer for a question. You may ask a question of anyone on the panel, or you may ask a broader question of all the people on the panel. Would you turn this way so they can hear you too? Yeah. I like that. Yeah, it's kind of a game. Like, what's give you a couple adjectives.
Open-hearted and unpretentious.
Temptation and a calling.
Wrestling with many ghosts.
It's a beautiful contradictions.
Curious and stubborn. It's the same.
I would say the harvest of generations past, free at last.
Courageous and fruitful.
Mine's not going to be nearly as good, but I definitely think strange and strange and complicated in all the good and like weird connotations.
What a great question. One more? Anybody? Yes, ma'am, please. Okay, so the question for you, if you didn't hear in the back, she asked about Ashley and Camille who read pieces and wanted to know when those pieces would come out and what they're from.
Yeah, so what I read it was from my work in progress, but the excerpt is actually in the anthology that's going to be on sale.
This here anthology.
That anthology.
Same. The full excerpt is in the anthology. When the novel will come out, I'm not sure.
Speaking of the anthology, just after this, these nice people retired to the tent. Is that correct?
Yeah.
The signing tent, where you may get them to inscribe said copy of this book with all of their work in it. And I encourage you to find them in the big tent after. Yes, sir. Okay, so if you couldn't hear in the back, this is a complex question to come at the end. It's a good way to bring us home.
When you've had
he
enough.
Said
When you've had enough. That's when it's done.
The question Maurice is already quick to answer is when you know when a novel is finished.
When you've had enough.
When you're sick of it.
When do you know that it's going to get finished?
Can I cuss? Well, all of my novels, I went the traditional route. So I have editor copy, I have folks. So they tell me, because I'm very honest with them. I say, hey, I'm bad at endings, friend. Like I can bring you in and I don't know when to let you go. So I usually rely heavily on my team to do that. But yes, and my first novel, when I did not have a team, when I got sick of that book, I just said the end and typed it.
There you go. That seems somehow the right place to close, I think. So I want to thank my really smart and kind and insightful colleagues up here, the inaugural class of the Southern Prize Fellows. Thank y'all so much for your engagement. So the very helpful question from the front row, where do you buy this book? You buy it from the signing tent here on site. There's also a booth in Authors Row from South Arts. Or you can go to Hub City Press, and eventually, this is hot off the press, like this is still smoking. You can eventually buy it in any bookstore you choose. So we hope you'll engage with these authors. Thank y'all again. Thank you to South Arts for putting money in the pockets of writers. Thank you to Mississippi Book Festival for convening this beautiful thing.
Thank you all. Thank y'all.